Hi everyone, William here with the Grand Duke Dmitri Diary series. We are in 1915 today, our last day of January 1915. And a brief recap. So in the 1935 installment, the end of the speech for the 12th of June that Dmitri gave to Young Russia, he's talking about the components of a living Russia, two of which are the guiding force of the Russian Orthodox Church and class equality. So that's interesting. And all of this would be presided over by this man who is called the High Sacrifice and the One. So kind of a temporal version of Jesus for Russia, this being Grand Duke Kirill Vladimirovich, whom Dmitri was so adamantly opposing way back in 1921, if you recall those diary entries. Okay, 1915, our recap. We had the mention of the two women, Balashova the ballerina and Brasova, Grand Duke Michael's wife, both of whom Dmitri was interested in and sort of pursuing. And we had a visit to a military hospital with war wounded. And Dmitri not having much to say, whereas Maria was, talking to them and connecting. Okay, our cast, we have the usual four in Usovo: Dmitri himself, Cook, Laming, and Maria. As I said, it's the 31st of January, which means on the new calendar in the West, it was the 13th of February, and it was -2 degrees, so it had suddenly gotten much warmer than it was before. But it was windy and overcast, so not a very nice day. Here we go. My God, how quickly the first month of this new year flew by. What will things be like in January 1916? And when, in what month, will we be able to breathe easily again, knowing that the peace desired by the whole world has arrived, founded on the triumph of Russia and complete victory over the enemy? Yes, it's not likely to happen before autumn. I got up at 10 o'clock. I slept well. We drank coffee, then slid down the hill, then skied. It was difficult because there was so much snow. At 1 o'clock, we had lunch, Akapt, GM, Cook, Maria, and I. Then we sat around for a while, and around 3 o'clock went to Alinskaya. We went in simple sleighs. We walked in the park, then went inside, where it was -8 degrees, but everything was in amazing order. It even smelled the same. Around 4 o'clock, we went home, and at 5 o'clock had tea, after which I read and finished Superconsciousness, a very good book. Dinner was at 8 o'clock, after which we played Tyotka. It was great fun. I won. We had tea at midnight, after which Cook and I went for a walk. The weather was remarkably warm. We walked until 2 a.m., then had tea again and went to bed around 3 o'clock. So we have Dmitri in one of his more poetic casts of mind, not extremely so, but this was quite typical of him. It would continue to be quite typical of him on any significant calendar date. I mean, this one isn't so much, it's simply the end of January, but it had been an unusual January for him there at Usovo. So, he becomes rather contemplative. And what does the future hold? And he does this over and over again in the diaries. And, there's kind of a poetic side to it. What will things be like exactly a year from now? I thought that was something that he only started doing after the revolution, but no, clearly not. when will we be able to breathe easily again? Yeah, he was very anti-war. Maybe because of the experience he had in 1914 on uh, in the invasion of East Prussia. But I think even before that, I mean, Maria, insofar as you can take anyone's memoirs at face value, said that he was very distressed by and opposed to the war at the time when it was being discussed as a possibility. And then when the mobilization was called up, and maybe that was just because at heart he really wasn't a military man. Maybe it was because, of the unpleasantness, personal unpleasantness, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt that he was also just sort of an anti-war person. He didn't have the same enthusiasm that he had had as a younger man when he tried to talk Nicholas into allowing him to go and, at least as an observer, if not a participant, in this war between Italy and I can't remember who. And Nicholas said no to that. But at that time, he'd been, quite enthusiastic. He'd wanted to go and have that immersive experience. And I don't know anything about the war itself, so whether it was a bloody one or not a bloody one, more just a standoff, I don't know. Anyway, you laugh and you cry. He's convinced that this is not going to happen before autumn 1915. Of course, as we know, the armistice was declared only in November 1918. So, I guess there were still people, Dmitri among them, and Dmitri, usually was not poorly informed about such things. That the war might still, as horrible as it had been, it might still be over by the end of 1915. So definitely wishful thinking. And this idea that the triumph of Russia is going to usher in sort of the peace desired by the whole world, founded on the triumph of Russia and complete victory over the enemy. So, there's always this sort of, messianic thread running through Russian thought when it comes to Russian national thought. In the U.S., that thread is more sort of this idea that we're going to bring freedom to the world. We see lately, at least, that I don't know. I kind of roll my eyes at that. But that we're going to bring freedom and democracy to the world. Russia is going to bring peace and beauty and salvation, according to Dostoevsky. And so we will have Dmitri mentioning Dostoevsky in the near future. Anyway, so they go to Ilinskaya. Maria probably wanted to go and see it. Maybe it had been quite a while since she'd been there. And they found it. It's interesting. Everything's in good order. No worries. But it's minus 8 degrees inside the house. That's colder than it was outside. There must have been a room thermometer in there somewhere, but you wouldn't think they would let it get that cold. You would think that would cause damage, that they'd be heating at least part of it, on a rotating basis. But wow, minus 8 degrees. And I'm intrigued by what he says about the smell, that it has its usual smell. And I wonder what it smelled like. Did it smell like tobacco? That would be one of the interesting things to know. It wouldn't have smelled like fresh flowers at that time of year. Now we turn to the book, the Higher Consciousness. Boy, our friend is just a speed reader. I remember this before with other books. He just devours these books. I must say I'm impressed. I'm sort of, granted it's not my native tongue, but I'm making my way slowly through the books that he has read so quickly. The Bourget book, Le Démon de Midi in French, and the Higher Consciousness or Super Consciousness in Russian. And it's an interesting book. It's very typical for its day, for the early 20th century. And they were just trying as hard as they could to put put spiritual things on a scientific setting, or at least say, oh, look, this is as scientific as anything else. Nobody can see the atom, but scientists are saying that this thing, the atom, exists. So, and this sort of idea that you can locate and somehow quantify the soul or figure out what it's made out of. There was this experience where they would put a dying person who hopefully volunteered on this a very platform that was a very, very finely calibrated scale. And then they wanted to see how much the soul weighed when the man died, this kind of thing. And I kind of was poo-pooing that the other day in relation to Dmitri, because he made the comment about that he was glad that this book was presented as a subjective point of view, which is more the Eastern way of looking at things. But so far, what I'm reading in the book, and I'm not very far, is that, there's this idea, this theosophistic idea that the soul can be sort of divided into parts and almost kind of quantified. And you may not think this is very interesting or important, but it was something that Dmitri would stay attuned to. So in that sense, it is important. It's also something that linked him to a lot of other people who were looking into these same things at the time, and even in a sort of perverse way, because of what happened in 1916 to the whole thing about Rasputin, and this whole idea of these kind of occultic, vaguely occultic things, which were so popular at that time. Anyway, I wonder if he came to see the irony of that, but I don't think so, because he kept going with this stuff. Okay, what do we have next? I'm not familiar with the game Tyotka. It's like little auntie, so maybe it's something like old maid. I don't know. So, but he's winning at it, and unlike chess, so he enjoyed that, obviously, writing that down in his diary. I won. Okay, and again, I don't know, is this another manifestation of him being in one of these sort of wistful, poetic states of mind? But he goes on this 2-hour walk at midnight, doesn't get home till 2 a.m., then has tea, doesn't get in bed till 3 a.m. He goes with Cook. Cook has never struck me as a very philosophical person. He's all about outdoors and outdoor activity, but I shouldn't say that, because I have some particularly close friendships with gardeners. I mean, gardeners on a large scale in, botanical gardens, and they tend to be very philosophical people, although in Cook's case, it's more about the sports and the activities. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling here, but I'm really intrigued by this. I guess it wasn't in the moonlight because he says it was overcast, but this late night walk, and remembering when he was a child talking about the plaintive cry of an owl and that sort of thing. And so I wonder, boy, would I love to know what he and Cook were talking about or thinking about if they weren't talking when they took this long walk. Okay, so what do we have next time? Well, next time, another big topic, the Russian soul. And I think what we're learning about Dmitri in 1915 and how the victory of Russia would usher peace into the world and that sort of thing is very relevant to what we're talking about for 1935 through 1939 and his thinking there. The next 1915 diary entry, pretty much the same stuff, the sledding, the starting of a new book, that sort of thing, but it will be, will it? I think so. It will be either our last day or our second to the last day in Usovo for good. He is ending this phase of his life where he was there in the countryside, away from everything, recovering from whatever this mysterious weakness of his was that they were treating with arsenic. He will be leaving all that behind him forever. I don't know if he ever went back to Usovo. I know that there was some thinking that after you know, after him spending some time at the Persian front, he would be allowed to return to Russia, and he would be confined to his Usovo state. And he wrote to Poland saying, "I want to stay in Persia. I don't want to come back and be at Usovo." But of course, that never ended up happening because of the revolution. Whew. So, talking about lots of extra stuff today, so forgive me for that. And come back next time, and I will see you then. Bye.